Okay everyone, let's get going and let's start this webinar. The topic of this webinar is layout configuration, and there will be soon also webinars for component modeling and robot programming. Layout configuration basically means that we will focus on the Home tab in the user interface of the Visual Components Essentials 4.0, and we're also going to cover the backstage and the drawing in this webinar. There is a chat option in the webinar. I won't be reading your messages during this webinar, but I will go through them after the webinar, and this webinar will be shared on our forum, where I will also answer any questions if you have dropped any in the chat. So feel free to type any questions there. Okay, so first let's take a look on the user interface, and let's start that by checking some of the typical settings that we want to configure. Now I have Visual Components Essentials opened here in the default settings, and you can find backstage from top left corner file. I go there. This is where I can open my layout. I can save my layout. I can see the information about the currently open layout. I can see something about the license, the version, and the end user license agreement. Also, I will find options here on the backstage. On the general tab or the general section of these settings, I can change my language. I will go with the English. I can change my units, metric plus US or US only. The default is metric, meaning that if you, for example, create a component that has a length property, you can choose from meters and centimeters and so on. If you put metric plus US, you can also choose inches. And if you change the US component, for example, if component has been modeled with metrics, those units will be converted to closest imperial unit then. Then we can change the theme. I personally prefer this dark theme, so I will change to that. I also like my scroll wheel for zooming to be a little bit faster, so I a little bit increase that. Then I need to accept my changes, and I need to hit OK in the lower right corner. And now you can see that the user interface is a lot darker. My scroll wheel zooms faster, but now I see that the 3D scene is a little too bright compared to other user interface. So I go and modify that too. I go back to the backstage options, and this time to the display section. This is where I can change my background color to quite dark. I will keep floor and grid visible. I will change my floor color also pretty dark, and I will change the grid coloring so that the major grid line is bright and the minor line is not quite as light. Also, what I personally like is to see my world origin frame, so this is where you can enable and disable that. So I will check that, and again I need to hit OK to accept this. If I hit here, I kind of cancel my changes. So I hit OK. Now the 3D scene is also quite dark, which I personally like, and I see my world origin also in the layout. Okay, that's some typical settings that we need to set. Or you don't have to, but if you like that, you can do that. Next thing that you need to learn when using Visual Component software is to learn to navigate the 3D world. And if you want to be a fast Visual Components user, this is the key to learn to navigate the 3D world quite quickly. The navigation is made very easy, so basically you just need to learn to orbit, pan and zoom, and you can do most of that just with your mouse. So the right mouse button and drag mouse will orbit, panorating will be done with the left mouse button plus right mouse button down, and then dragging the mouse, and zooming is with scroll wheel up and down. So I will take some components in the layout to make the navigation easier to explain. So I will go to the eCatalog, Models by Manufacturer, Visual Components section, and from Products and Containers I will find, for example, a palette. I will go with the Euro palette, and I will take a box, and I can drag and drop that into the layout. Now I can orbit, panorate and zoom. So right mouse button down and mouse, and you orbit both down and move your mouse, your panorate and scroll wheel will zoom in. You can also zoom in with the shift and right mouse button and then move your mouse up and down. That will always zoom to the center of the screen, and also you get a little bit better control than using the scroll wheel. Sometimes you need more detail, some zooming level between these steps, and then you get better control using shift and right mouse button and move mouse up and down. So it zooms to the center. Also it's nice to know how to center the world to some specific detail in your model. You can do that simply by right-clicking somewhere in the model and click Center in 3D View. Then it centers to that, and it zooms to that, and it rotates, orbits around that position. This won't work centering to the floor, so you need to be on top of the 3D model in order for this to work. And shortcut for this is holding down your control key and right-clicking somewhere in the model. So you will probably quite quickly learn to just control right-click to go somewhere in the model. This gets more and more important as you're building bigger layouts, so that you can focus on a section where you're interested in. Okay, that's about navigating the 3D world. Then let's take a look on the 3D controls. You can see on the 3D, on top of the 3D scene, there's some controls on the left side. Somewhere in the middle of the 3D window, you see 3D toolbox, and on the lower left corner, you have controls for your standard views. So let's take a bit more detailed look into those. First of all, in this 3D toolbox, the topmost button is simply for filling the 3D with the content in the layout. So I click here and it zooms and fills the screen with the content. It's especially very handy if you somehow accidentally get lost in space and you don't have no idea where's your model. Then simply click this and you're back on track. You can also do Control F, which is a shortcut for the same thing. The next button here is quite similar, but it fills the selection. So now you can see on the screen that the box is selected. Then I click this one, so then it zooms and fills this box on the screen. Very handy when you quickly want to zoom in to some details in your layout. So simply select and click here, and you get that nicely on the screen. Next one looks a little bit like a light icon on your car dashboard. That means a headlight. There's always in 3D a light source which makes these things visible in the layout. And when the headlight is on, like in my settings, it is now on, the light source follows the camera. So we're always on the bright side of the 3D model. If I disable this, you can see here that the box is quite light from this side, and from this side it's pretty dark. As a normal mode, I always keep the headlight on, so I always see what I want to see. But if I want to get, for example, a little bit more artistic screenshots, sometimes it's useful to get this headlight off, and you get a little bit more artistic feeling, or it emphasizes the shading a bit better. But go ahead and try it out with your models. Okay, next one looks like a cube, and there we can choose between the perspective and orthographic rendering modes. Orthographic will align every parallel line is also parallel on the screen. This is something users might be familiar with from CAD softwares, which is oftentimes using this. And it is handy, for example, if you want to double check alignment of some machines or something like that in the layout, because everything is parallel if they are parallel. But for me personally, I like this perspective view more. This orthographic a little bit hurts my brain. This is more natural. This is something we also see in real life. Everything has some perspective, so this is typically what I use as a normal mode. Okay, the next icon here, you see a little arrow next to these three ones. You can also click that arrow and it drops down you some options. This is the shading mode. Here you can go to wireframe shading or to all edges and faces shading. Faces shaded plus the boundaries of the faces. The X-ray shaded, sometimes useful to see if some component is inside of another one. You see this nice X-ray rendering. The next one is the normal shaded mode, which is the basic standard one, and this is probably preferred, especially if you don't have a super fast computer. The next one here are putting a little bit more eye candy on the 3D models. This material shaded mode, it doesn't necessarily make a huge difference. It depends on how your models are done, what kind of materials you are using. So those shaders can be discussed in the future webinars more in details. So between shaded and material shaded, you don't necessarily see a whole lot of difference. But when we enable this realistic shaded, it also adds ambient occlusion. So you see that, for example, these tight, narrow places are a little bit occluded, they're a little bit darker, and that gives you that nice, realistic feeling. And the last one is the same, but with edges shaded. I will keep this realistic shaded as my computer can nicely handle this. Okay, the next one here is frame visibility, and you can also drop down some options here, or you can click the icon. It means that when this icon is highlighted with blue color, it shows in the 3D scene all the things which are enabled here. So these disabled ones are always hidden, whether you have this on or off. And in this webinar, we don't need to see frames or robot positions. We will come to those in the future webinars more in details. Same with these. So let's just skip those in this, and I will just disable that. So that's the 3D toolbox. Then in the lower left corner, we have the controls for the standard views. You also see your orientation into 3D from this cube. So it shows you that the top face is there, back face is there, right face is there, or plane. And the idea is that when you click one of these arrows, it takes the next closest next 45-degree rotation. So for example, if I want to rotate the top view, I click this so that I get the T pointing towards me, and I click up until I'm right on top of the layout. So that's hopefully quite intuitive. Okay, that's the 3D controls. Next on the menu we have these basic modes, select mode, PMP, which stands for plug and play, move mode, and interact mode. I will take some other components in the layout in order to demonstrate all those. So I take, for example, from interior facilities component called cupboard. Cupboard shows me this little yellow arrow here. That means that there's a plug and play interface available. And I can plug and play components so they snap together. When I go close enough, the little green arrow is highlighted where I need to move a little bit still, and then when I'm close enough, it snaps in place. So plug and play allows you to move components on the floor level. You don't necessarily need to click on the component. When I have this selected, I can click even here in the empty space and start dragging, and it moves the selection. This is by design, and it's very handy when you have a small component selected and you don't necessarily need to aim on top of that component in order to move it. Also in this PMP mode you see this little circle. If you click here, you can start rotating the component on the floor or around its Z-axis, because this is what you typically do when you're configuring layouts. You move them on the floor and you rotate them on the floor. And as I'm rotating, I can see this little angle dial shown, and if I go on top of the dial with my mouse, I can go to, for example, easily to sharp 90-degree rotation. So that's plug and play in short. But for example, plug and play doesn't allow you to elevate this box. So if I would like to put this box on this pallet, I should elevate that. So I will go to move mode. In move mode, the handle, different handle is shown. Instead of that simple circle, we see a full 3D handle where we can translate, rotate, and move component on these planes. In this mode, you need to choose one of these handles. It highlights you the active one. So if you move somewhere here, nothing will happen. And when you're doing this translation, you can again freely move along that axis, but you can also snap to these predefined measurements. And that grid scale is changing as you zoom in and out. And you can quickly see it here. You can also force that to be always, for example, 50. But this automatic size here means that as you zoom out, this is now 250 millimeters. I zoom more out. Now it seems to be 1 meter steps. So that's handy little feature there. Also, if I want to move and I want to elevate this box on this pallet height, while moving along the Z-axis, if I hold down Control, I can simply snap somewhere, for example in the corner of the pallet, and it takes the same elevation. So it projects this to whatever I snap if I hold down Control. That's a neat feature for power users to quickly elevate components or translate them along axis to a certain distance. And there's also this little donut here. I can start dragging the component from there. If I go on top of another component, it starts to snap on the face, on the center of the face, on the edge, on the middle point of the edge, or in the end point of an edge. Also circle centers are found, but in this model we don't have any circles. And it also takes the orientation from that face. And if I'm on the edge doesn't have a predefined orientation, but it takes the closest plane. And if I move my mouse a little bit towards the left or towards the right, it takes one of those faces connected to this edge. So little practice and you can position your components very quickly. There's also some shortcuts in this command. If I hold down Control, I can go over that palette without it snapping, and then I release my Control and again it snaps. So sometimes you, for example, want to avoid some orientation change while you move on over a component. So hold down Control and it moves on a screen base. Release the Control and it starts snapping again. Another neat shortcut here is the Shift key. If I start dragging this donut, I hold down Shift. It snaps only to the edge, end points, middle points, and face centers. Also circle centers are detected. So for example, if you want to move this to the circle center, if it feels tricky to find that circle center, just hold down Shift and it will help you to detect the circle center. Okay, that's that. So let's say we want to move this box so that the corner of the box goes to the corner of the palette. Of course I could simply eyeball it there, moving from this plane and then moving from this plane, but I'm probably not quite there. So we should do snapping or something similar. So we find some commands here, and before going there, let's take a quick look on the select tool. So we already saw the PNP and move tool. Now if we go to the select tool, that allows us to do selection like this. You can do multi-selection also by holding down Control and adding stuff to your selection or removing things from the selection. But with select tool you can draw a rectangle to do a box selection. You can also have this freeform selection, and then you can more in details draw the selection, what you want to include and exclude. Then you can invert the selection or simply select all. Also, if you are in, let's say, plug and play mode, you hold down Control and it's a shortcut to do this quick selection. So Control for selection. Okay, and interact will allow you to interact with components that have, for example, opening doors or robot that can be moved up and down. So interact will be helpful there. We will see that a little bit later. So that's those basic modes that you work with. You select a mode and you will stay there until you change the mode. And the default mode is the plug and play in the home context. Okay, then we have these basic commands: measure, snap, and align. Let's take a look on those. They might be very intuitive to use, but let's take a little bit deeper look. They might have some little tricks that are good to know. So first of all, measure. With measure, I can click, for example, this edge and that edge, and it shows the distance between those edges. I can also select, for example, this corner point here and that corner point there. It shows me the closest distance between those points, and it also shows the distance currently in world coordinates along x, y, and z. So for example, measuring that box you can get all the measurements by clicking the opposing corners. And again, the same shortcut works, that if I hold down Shift, it's easy to snap on the midpoints and end points of an edge, for example, or center of the face. And if you don't want to see those x, y, z values, you just want to see the actual distance between the points, you can disable it here. If you want to measure angles, you will go to the angle mode, you select this edge and that edge, and it shows that the shortest angle between those edges is 90 degrees. You can also do both at the same time, but typically I prefer using distance or angle at time. So that's measure tool. Also it shows the measurements in 3D, but you always get those measurements here in the output panel. So for example, if you need to copy and paste your measurement, this is an easy place where you can copy it and paste it elsewhere. Alright, next let's check the snap tool. Snap tool is basically similar than dragging from this donut, but it gives you all these options. So I select the box and I launch the snap tool. It always snaps whatever you have selected before launching this command. And I can start snapping. So this is the same thing what we did with the pink donut before. But here we can, for example, say that I'm happy with the orientation of the box. I don't want to change that, so I disable the orientation. And now it keeps the same orientation wherever I try to snap it. Also, I can change the alignment axis. So for example, if I would like to snap it inverted, I could take -z as my alignment axis. And now it will snap it inverted into the target. And if I take +y, for example, it will snap there sideways. Not particularly what I want to do in this case, so I will put this back to +z. And you can also filter out what kind of features you are allowed to snap in 3D. These settings are the same settings that will work for the pink donut. So if you change these settings here, remember that in here you will use the same setting. So if, for example, if you disable the orientation snap, it won't do the orientation snap from the pink donut either. There's two neat helper snapping modes here. So I will disable, for example, this orientation. I'm happy with the default orientation. I can take two-point snap. Let's say I would like to, I didn't have anything in the middle here. Now I could snap it easily on that center point of that panel, but I could also snap with two-point snap this corner point. Then as I move my mouse, the component actually is placed between these 2 points. Then I take the other corner and there's an imaginary line going from corner to corner and the component is placed in the center of that. Similar approach with 3-point snap. Let's say I would like to snap it in the center of these 2 panels. I can't snap it directly because these are a little bit asymmetric, so I will snap this corner point, that corner point, and that corner point. And the system draws an imaginary circle through those points and places the component in the dead center of that. Cool. But the snap tool won't help us a lot if we want to place this component, for example, so that nicely this face or this corner aligns with that corner. For that purpose we have align tool. So I can take the align tool, snap this face, snap that face, and I will take this face and this face, and it aligns those nicely. That's pretty straightforward. You may have noticed that every time I click these components, a little quick menu appears here. This is where I can delete the component, change the mode to interact, plug and play or move. I also have align and snap tool here available, and there's also a clone component option. So I can take another box. A neat way to get this box, for example, aligned next to that box is that I can hold down Shift, wiggle my mouse a little bit, and I can start dragging the component from a custom point. So I can drag that corner to there. While I have that red one there, I could modify that again. If I hit escape, that circle will disappear. But if I hold down Shift again, I can take another snapping point. I can snap that corner to that corner. So that's a nice another alignment tool, useful, for example, placing products on a positioner or things like that. Okay, let's move forward. So that's measure, snap, and align tools. Let's do some actual layout now, and we will use some components from the eCatalog. This webinar won't go details to the components; those can be then covered later. Let's do some example, simple example layout using feeders, conveyors, and machine tending library. So I will take a new layout, go in File, clear all. I don't want to save this, and I have a new empty layout. Then I will go to my library, feeders. I will double click a shape feeder, and it appears in the dead center of the world. If I drag and drop, I can freely place it anywhere. Then I go to my conveyors library. I double click the conveyor, and it automatically connects with the previously selected component. If I double click conveyor again, I have another conveyor, and it connects automatically. Now if I want to change the properties of this component, you can see them here on the right. I can change the type to a belt conveyor, for example. If I multi-select components, I can change values for multiple components. So if I select all of them, I could change, for example, the width to 300 millimeters. Okay, very good. Then I will take a divert, excuse me, and I drag and drop that into the world. I snap it together with that conveyor. I will clone another conveyor, connect that there, clone another one, and connect that there. Then I can play my simulation from this play button. So this is where we have our simulation controls. Hitting that plus sign, we can make the simulation a little bit faster, or you can simply drag this. And if you double click that little node, it resets back to real time, one-time speed. Okay, very good. Now this divert looks to be routing the boxes so that every second one goes to the left, every second one goes to the straight, and we can modify that in the routing rule. So this component can do routing. There's a routing rule section in the properties. It is using now cyclic rule, and it's cycling straight side, and looping that. We could add here another line, for example, side. So then it would loop straight side, straight side. But I will change this rule type completely different. I will take a percentage rule. I will add another line there, and I will say randomly 80% of my components will go straight. I will add another one and say 20% will go to side. And now if we simulate this again, we will see that most of the components or the boxes will go straight through, and some will every now and then turn left. Okay, that's very good. Then from the conveyors I will take, for example, a curve conveyor. Connect that one there. This one we could change to go left or right. I'm happy with the right. And I copy and paste with Ctrl+C, Ctrl+V, or right-click, copy and paste. And I will connect that there. Then I clone another conveyor, and I will put the robot here to pick and place these components. I will go to machine tending library, where I can find this little sensor-like component. I can snap it into the conveyor. I take another component, I can snap it to this one. So this will be my input, this will be my output. And I will take a machine tending pedestal. I will find a robot. I can snap any robot on top of that pedestal, again using a plug and play tool. And I will rotate this so that it's facing those conveyors better. Now it won't automatically pick and place those, so I need to associate these sensors with the robot. We do connections with plug and play and dragging components together, but you can do also like a remote connections, which are called abstract connections in visual components, by enabling interfaces here. Then when you select a component that has interfaces, this little label is shown. And there's a connect process stages interface. I can start dragging a line from that connection. I can drop it there. As I start to drag, some components are highlighted yellow. That means that that component can be connected. When they are green, it means they are connected. So I made those connections. Now I don't need to worry about the interfaces anymore. I can unselect the component and they are hidden. If I select it again, it shows those connections, but if I don't want to see them, I just simply disable the interfaces again. And now the robot is simply picking and placing those boxes. Not super smart layout, but works as an example. Okay, that's how you can plug and play components, and that's how you can also connect components remotely. There's some more stuff to this simulation control. So we did play the simulation, we can pause the simulation, and you will have all your dynamic components in the layout still in the place where they were left. I can continue simulating. These products which are generated during the simulation are called dynamic components, and the components that remain there when I hit reset, these are called static components. So there's dynamic components which are usually like products, and static components which is the actual layout and the production line. So I can reset the simulation. There's a little piston icon here where you can access some settings. You can put maximum simulation runtime. By default it's 0, meaning that you can simulate infinitely. You can also put warm-up time, and if you put some value here, it will fast forward and simulate as fast as possible to that time. So for example, if it takes every time 2 minutes to warm up your simulation, you could put here 2 minutes, and when you hit play, it tries to simulate as fast as possible to that time. This is where you can also put the simulation to looping. Basically click this repeat, or if you want to change, for example, the initial position of this robot, we can do interact, move the robot a little bit, and go here and save state. Now if I reset my simulation, this is where the robot goes as an init position. Okay, very good. Then when we have done our simulation and we would like to share that with someone, we need to export some content that we can share, for example, over email. Typically you want to send some images, you want to maybe record a 3D PDF, maybe they want to see more in details a 2D drawing or some video. So let's do all of those. Image we can do simply by framing our 3D content to some interesting angle. You can of course simulate until you have product on the line. Let's say for example there's some action and I want to take an image of this. So I will go to export image. Now the rendering will feel a lot more slower as you are in realistic shaded, because when we are exporting an image it will use even better quality for anti-aliasing and for this ambient occlusion calculation. So you will get crispier pictures, but if you need to frame this again, maybe your rendering is very slow, so you might want to go to shaded mode to do the framing again and changing the angles. Then you can go to realistic shading. You can choose your resolution. I will do for example 720, or let's do full HD. I would want to have a PNG file. I could have a JPEG or just have the picture on the clipboard and I could paste it to my email, and I will simply export. I would like to put this as a demo.png on my desktop, and I will have that picture on my desktop saved as a demo.png. Awesome. Okay, then recording PDF. But before that, let's take a look on the what is called cell graph. So next to the e-catalog, there's a little sub-tab here called cell graph. This is where we can see basically the content of the layout, and it's categorized automatically by the component category. If I drag a component from a conveyors library, the category for that component is conveyors. You can select components here. You could also change that category within the layout, and you could put, for example, a couple of the conveyors to different category if you want to. You can also multi-select group of components by simply selecting that category. You could hide those components or lock those components in place so that you don't accidentally move those. Now that I select conveyors, it's easy for me, for example, to change the height. I would like to also change the height of or let's say I just change the width of the conveyors. I leave the feeder as is. So I will make these a little bit wider, so it's easy to do that for the whole group. You can also double click a component here and it highlights that component in the 3D. If you double click a category, you can rename the whole category. If we take a look on the properties of the components, there's a bill of material BOM flag for each component. When the flag is disabled, it means that this component is excluded from the bill of materials. I'm not selling in this system this feeder as it's an imaginary component. I'm mostly focusing on the conveyor system. So I will make sure all my conveyors are included in the bill of materials as they are. I also want to take the inlet and the outlet out of the bill of materials, but this pedestal I want to include there. And as a description to my bill of materials, I will say this will raise the robot to right elevation, for example, or whatever you feel like. And I also put the robot in the bill of materials. And where this information gets handy is when we record the PDF. You can launch the PDF recording also not just from the start of the simulation. You can start until some interesting point, and you can start recording a PDF from here. You can choose different templates. By default, there's now just one Visual Components template. If you want to create your own template, you can go to Program Files, Visual Components, and the installation folder. There's a PDF templates folder, and this is where you can copy and paste another, and you need to leave the same prefix, this VC default underscore, and this is how you can create another template, and you could now modify this in Adobe. You of course need a real Adobe Pro software in order to modify those templates, and it requires software launch to get it here, so now I don't see that yet, but next time when I launch this software again, I would have another template there. I will call this just a demo. I will use the default template, and I will start recording. I will save this as a report.pdf on my desktop, have it simulating a while. It might look a little bit chunky on the screen, but the result will be smooth. Don't worry about that. And I stop the simulation whenever I feel like. It generates this PDF file. The layout content is there, and also in the bill of materials we have those components that were set with this BOM property. Very good. You also have these quick controls to different views. Okay, that's how you record a PDF. Same thing you can do with the video recording. That time you will launch it from the export to video button. You can change the resolution. I will do, for example, 720p, frame rate 25, video codec AVI is fine, and I will do high quality. If you use here uncompressed and you use uncompressed here, you will get the maximum quality, but of course the recording will be slower and the file size will be bigger. Now we didn't do any camera flies here, so the result won't be super interesting, but let's do a quick recording here now. There we go. And then it shows the recording, and you could share this with your customer. Okay, very good. If you need to do camera flies, you can do that with the component from Media Toolkit library and Fly Camera. And in the properties of that, you can create views and animate views and so on. But that's not now included in the content of this webinar. Okay, then drawing. Sometimes your customer might want to see a technical drawing out of this, where you can put measurements and so on. So in that case, we go to new context called drawing, and different scene is showing. So it shows an empty scene, and we typically want to start this by loading a drawing template. You don't necessarily need to load a paper template there, but it helps you to put everything in place, and you make sure that everything fits on the paper when you print it out or when you export a DWG file, for example. So I will load in a template. There's a couple of default options. I will take A3 paper, and I will import that paper. or the template. If you select that template, it is like a component. It has properties. So it has, for example, the title of. So this is demo. And we could say that the material is not available and the material on the paper shows not available. And the drawing number could be project number 1500A, and that is also visible here. And we can put the default scale. I will put, for example, 150 scale, and that will be the default scale when you import drawing views. So now we would like to import a drawing view. I will take a top view, so it will take automatically this kind of a top view from the 3D. So I simply click top and it imports the top view. I can place it, I can rotate it with same kind of a handles as in 3D mode, and I could take left and right and whatnot, but with this select it allows me to select the view. So I click this select and it throws me into the 3D content, and I can just select the view I want to include in my drawing. This is a perspective view, so the scale may not be similar as the real scale in this drawing, but all these drawing view scales can be modified later. So I can simply select this and make it a little bit bigger. Let's put it like that. Very good. And now the same bill of materials properties can be used in order to create bill of materials in this drawing. So you remember that we modified these BOM checkbox here. So same thing works here. I select the view and I click BOM create, and it adds a couple of components into the bill of materials automatically. So for example, number 4 is a curve conveyor. You can modify if you're not happy, for example, this automatic position. It's not super clear if it's pointing this straight one or this curve one. So I can drag this line and reposition my balloon to make sure that it points to the correct component. Same thing with this divert. Very cool. Then even if the component is excluded from the bill of materials, I can add manually a balloon number 5 that points now to shape feeder. And that name can be modified as a component property in the BOM name property. Very good. Then we want to add some dimensioning. So I will take a linear dimension so that we get the ballpark size of the system, the length, and the width. And we could add even an annotation here that robot brand not decided yet. And I will make it a little bit smaller font that it fits on the drawing. Then this one can be exported to a PDF or native Autodesk DWG, or you could simply print it out on a paper. So that's pretty much about the layout configuration. In the future we will take a look on the program and modeling tab, And this particular webinar will be shared for download, and if you want to look at it again or share with someone else, in the Visual Components forum, there's a section for webinars. There's a couple of those previous webinars, Python API and .NET already available. So you can find this latest tomorrow here, and you can also ask questions related to this webinar. So thank you for joining and watching, and stay tuned for more. Bye-bye.